Welcome to episode 78 of Silver Lining for Learning. I'm really excited about today's episode. A few episodes ago, we had a conversation about the COVID-19 crisis and what it means for teacher educators and what we should learn from it. And despite the fact that we had some good work showcased there was some sort of concern in this group around the fact that there didn't seem to be a new vision, a new way of thinking about schooling. And if there's one thing that we know about the grammar of schooling, it is that we have an educator in a space, and COVID times, that space could be real or virtual, with a bunch of learners. Now, the classic one teacher, one classroom model. And that in some ways is constant, maybe across the globe. But a couple of questions that come up from this is this model sustainable? Does it work for the educator? More importantly, does it work for the learners, for individual students? And a question that we will get into, and I think and something that one of our guests wrote, which is, why is teaching the only profession where it looks the same on day 3000 and it looks as day one? That teachers, the schools are a very flat hierarchy in some level. And so our guests today are working on providing a different model of what they call the next education workforce. And I'm seriously excited that they're joining us today. And what they mean by next education workforce is providing students with deeper personalized learning, bringing teams of educators with distributed expertise, and also providing avenues for teachers to advance in their profession. So first, my friend and colleague here at the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College, Brent Maddin. He's the executive director of the Next Education Workforce. Prior to this, he was provost and co-founder of the Relay Graduate School of Education. Brent leads this work at ASU, so I'm super excited to have him here give us this broad vision and the fact that now there are 30 plus schools doing this work. One of the schools that he works with is the Stevenson Elementary, and with the principal, Krista Adams, who is also a guest with us here today, speaking to the actual practicalities of taking these ideas that academics come up with and making it real in real classrooms. So over the past year, despite the pandemic, Krista went from one grade doing this distributed to going all school with this. So without further ado, let me start with you, Brent. So again, welcome to both of you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do. Maybe sort of help us understand why you say this one teacher, one classroom model is unsustainable, and why we need this new workforce model.
Well, Punya, thank you, and everyone else here. This is we're thrilled. I'm thrilled to be here. For the better part of 20 years of my career, I was working in teacher prep. I had the opportunity to build a graduate school of education from the ground up. We had thousands of teachers that were going through this program, and quite frankly, I felt like we had, turned the screws on it pretty well. It was pretty tight. And yet still, the best teachers that we were producing were leaving the classroom after 1, 2, 3 years. And if we're serious about a return on investment, this is a really strange model. So, what struck me was that maybe it wasn't that we were preparing the teachers poorly, but perhaps that the entire way that we had organized schooling and the job of an educator was just wrong. That we had actually created a set of circumstances that good thinking, thoughtful, interesting, and interested people were less likely to go into or stay into. And so what if we actually work to fundamentally change this long-held default normative assumption of the one teacher, one classroom model? And the moment that you start to change that primary assumption, so many other things start to become possible, right? That you no longer have to stress about what does the first year of teaching look like? Or if one of the people who's typically in a box with 30 kids for a day all by themselves is sick, oh my gosh, how do you cover that? That's and we have a sub-crisis in America right now. Pandemic aside, it's always hard, right? And so there are all these funny things that the moment that you start to challenge this one teacher, one classroom model, all of a sudden, there are many new opportunities. And then you kind of get out of the way and you let people like Principal Krista Adams and her teachers start to dream, and wow, watch what happens.
I'm going to stick with you, Brent, for one more question before going to Krista. Tell us the sort of the core pieces of this next education workforce. I mentioned some of these terms like distributed expertise, personalized, blah, blah, blah. If you can lay that out a little bit about what, because again, these models, I think, vary from place to place. What are some core elements or the essential elements in that?
Yeah. I thought you did a heck of a job, Punya.
Hey,
at the end of the day,
I've been drinking the Kool-Aid. You know, I
yeah,
mean,
you're in the mix here. So at the end of the day, I think that the biggest thing that I would want people to take away is that it is a team of educators with distributed expertise. So they each have their respective interests and superpowers. We're not asking a single individual to be all things to all people at all times. That's bananas. We should just stop doing that. And so you've got a team of educators sharing a common roster of students. And so we shouldn't hear this as like, oh, we have a PLC that meets on Fridays. That's a team, or we're a grade level team. And that, once a semester we get together and we think about, what are the projects that we're going to do? No, this is like you walk into a place and you actually have adults, multiple adults sharing a common roster of students. And this does look different in different places, and the learning space actually matters. And we'll probably get to that today. The other part of this is that, quite frankly, unless the academic tasks in which the students are engaged actually look different, right? And this is why we get to deeper and personalized learning, almost sort of a two sides to the same coin here. Why have multiple adults if you're actually not going to do something dramatically different? And that should look really, really exciting for students. They should be showing up excited to learn every day because the work feels authentic. It feels relevant. And then the last piece of this next education workforce is, quite frankly, we do a very good job of boxing people out of the education profession. That there are like hard pathways to actually enter the profession. So we're working to change that. And we can talk about that. We're also thinking about what does it look like to actually specialize in this work? How could we have educators that really did develop deep specialization? Again, this is possible because they're actually working with teams of other educators who also have specializations. And so if people are going deep in different places or different subjects or topics, or specialties, now we're cooking. And then finally, this idea of additional advancement within the profession. You said, Punya, like the first day on the job looks remarkably similar to the 3,000th day on the job. And that's just that's weird. So are there ways that we can create opportunities, teacher leadership opportunities for educators where they don't have to leave teaching kids to actually advance in this work, in this profession, both with respect to title, with respect to responsibilities, with respect to salary?
Thank you, Brent. So I'm going to move on to you, Krista. So you've been in this job, I think, as a principal at Stevenson for 4 years now. And so this is relatively new work as far as you're concerned. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this, how you got into the kind of things that Brent and Carol or Dean talks about, and how that has sort of played out in your professional work.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and get to spend some time with, such wonderful educational leaders. And then just truly what a joy to get to share some of the work happening at Stevenson in a community and a school that I just truly love. So it really started out I guess the way I got connected was only in January 2020, which just seems like an eternity ago, but it wasn't even 2 years ago. And I was only a second year principal, second year at Stevenson. And we were making some changes and some growth that needed to happen. But you know what? I just knew it wasn't enough. It needed to be more. And like Brent was talking about, there was a lot of the things that we were doing was this factory model of education, one teacher, one classroom, really isolating skills, you know, huge weight on teachers' shoulders with accountability and assessments. They're working really, really hard. And our district had adopted the Portrait of a Graduate, you know, had worked with the community to design it, and with wonderful outcomes that we wanted, being creative thinkers and innovators and, you know, contributing to the community. And just being at my school, I knew that we were not set up to produce students with those type of skills, and some changes needed to happen. Didn't know what that was, though. I was only a second-year principal. So, you know, I had spent some time networking with other principals in schools, doing some of the some more deeper personalized learning, and then fortunately came into a meeting at the zoo. That's kind of something that we laugh about at Phoenix Zoo. There was this wonderful meeting with Mesa Public School district leaders, and I was invited, and of course the good people at ASU with Dr. Basil and Brent, and talking about the next education workforce. And to me, it opened up of what exactly we needed to do. We definitely needed deeper personalized learning, but how do you do that? And it's with the teams of educators. And fortunately, they came down to my school, and we started looking at how to make that possible.
So I know Zhao has a question, but what does it look like right now? I mean, if you know a person would walk into your school, what would they see that would tell them that this is something different? And what has the response sort of been from the parents and others to this?
Great. Well, we started with just one grade level. I think you mentioned that. One group of teachers willing to just try it and be risk takers and dream big and link arms. And we just kind of wanted to experience it with our own students. And so that was the beginning of last year, in the middle of the pandemic, in the middle of remote learning. They were the ones trying it. And slowly, as we got to transition into in-person and more staff got to see that positive impacts that was happening, not only with our students, but with the teachers as well. It started to spill out and roll over to a school-wide model much quicker than I had anticipated. I thought we would go third grade, let's roll up to fourth grade, then fifth grade, but pretty soon it caught on, and teachers were excited and wanting to join. So today, if you were to walk into our school, I think what first stands out is our district has invested into our buildings. And, you know, it's a very old school, 50 years old, and they came in and knocked down some walls, put up some glass doors, got some flexible furniture, so that when you go into a grade level like third grade, all the classrooms are connected. There's a transparency. There are adults working with groups of kids. Kids are moving in and out of the spaces. That, you know, there's a lot less of the teacher in front of the room, kids sitting in rows, all listening to the same exact lesson and doing the same exact worksheet. We're really trying to move away from that and delivering a more connected, meaningful instruction.
All right, on and on with questions, but I know Zhao and Chris are waiting. So Zhao, you're up first.
Yeah, so thanks, Brent and Krista, that you guys are doing amazing things. I mean, this is amazing to rethink about how to organize teachers, how to do those things. I got really kind of two questions. One is the idea about, since Krista mentioned about these teachers work together during the pandemic, they were remote learning. So the first thing is really, when you talk about teacher leadership, teacher expertise are distributed, can they distribute outside your school? So that is, you know, can we bring experts, teachers from outside the school? I think many schools, when they're talking a lot of change, they fail to take advantage of what remote learning has enabled. You know, that is, expertise can be outside the school. Like Krista, can you fire 1/3 of our teachers and hire individuals from outside? I know Arizona is kind of crazy, you know, in a state anyway. The second thing is that when you think about personalized learning or personalization, how much do you allow that? Do students still have to follow the Arizona state curriculum? or can they really do whatever they like, whatever they're interested in, whatever they're good at, so they are not controlled and constrained by the curriculum. Any one of you, or both of you, go ahead.
Krista, you want to start, and then I'll jump in?
Sure, absolutely. I might have lost the first part. Oh, the experts bringing them outside in. So here's what I would say. We are at our infancy, right? I mean, we're 9 weeks in a school-wide model, but what you're talking about is exactly what we want to do and what we're aspiring to. The idea that there are experts out in our community that we can bring in to help deliver meaningful instruction so that students see that learning is not just something happening within the school, that we break down those walls and they see it in real life. I do think the pandemic and technology, those things have opened up access to a lot of that. And that's something we're working more towards. And then your second question was, do the students, are they still required to learn certain things, or can they learn what they want? Well, here's what I would say. When you're moving from a very traditional direct instruction model to one where you're trying to get teachers and students to think about learning differently, you have to take steps along the way, and there has to be scaffold. So there is still a lot of structure and routine. Everything we do is always tied to the state standards. There is opportunity for students to explore and their own passions and do research and, demonstrate and show their work. It's not a complete free-for-all. I don't think that the teachers nor the students would be ready for that. But we are experiencing a lot of success from just putting more voice and choice within the things that we're doing. I mean, for one example, a reading lesson a couple years ago would look like a third grade teacher delivering a reading lesson with the same text to all 30 students. Well, it looks very different now. Students are self-selecting. They've learned how to self-select just right books on topics that they're interested in, books that they know that they have the ability to read and access, and then eventually do something once they read books that they're choosing with. So that's like a small step towards, implementing more voice and choice within the curriculum.
And I think just to add on to what Krista's saying, and to jump up on the balcony a bit here, with the privilege of looking across, say, 30 schools that are now engaged in these new staffing models and structures. I'm a biologist by training, right? So I think about the membranes around schools, and that for the most part they're fairly non-permeable membranes, maybe semi-permeable at best. And one of the things that these next education workforce models do, the moment that you disrupt the one teacher, one classroom model of schooling, the moment that suddenly these teams of teachers are starting to think about grouping and regrouping students dynamically, right? That you have now opened up the ability to very easily start to bring in additional talent into these learning spaces, intentionally not saying classrooms, right? Into these learning spaces. And so whether it's virtual or it's actually physically coming in, I'll give a really concrete example. A few miles down the road from Krista's school, there's another school in Mesa Public Schools, and the students they were getting a new playground, but rather than the staff from the district coming in and building the playground, they basically invited the students into the co-design, and so you actually had expertise in the staff, the classified staff, who normally just comes in, builds a playground, and leaves, that were engaged with the students. And they actually built things that they probably wouldn't have had normally. So you don't even have to go outside of the district to find this expertise. There's people with wild amount of talent that are even so close. So one of the things that we're starting to do is to think about what's even the modest bit of training or development that if you could give to a doctor or a lawyer, the person who works in the construction staff, what would be if you had an hour with that person, what might you coach them to think differently about if they're going to be working with educators or working with kids. And so we started to build these online modules, and maybe we could put a link into some of these things in the feed here. We're thinking about community educators, and I like this question. I see where it could go, right? In terms of with respect to the personalization, like really allowing students to be learning anywhere at any time. And I see this, like I see hints of this. I see students in some of the schools where they're a little further along. And I think Krista's exactly right. It is a natural progression and a journey. But they're doing things like kids are picking topics and they're the experts on it. And they're actually teaching their peers about what those topics are. It turns out that you're able to cover a whole bunch of the Arizona State standards, right? In so doing. And it actually raises some of the awareness around like, what are the things that we want kids to know and be able to do? But I think it's a process. We're going to get there. It's going to be great.
I think, Chris, I know you're waiting for a question, but I just want to add to this. So this whole idea of the community educators, that schools, public schools in particular, are hubs for the broader community, but they have become sort of isolated from that in various ways. And I can just speak to from even like the example of Spark School and talking to Mary Brown about having state legislatures come in. But I think what Brent was speaking about was that it is not just about taking somebody off the street who has some expertise and bringing them into that space, that they also need a little bit of scaffolding and training. And I think that's where sort of the community education sort of online modules that Brent and his team are developing play an important part. So if you want to come in and help with reading, you could be an amazingly interested parent, but you do need a little bit of knowledge in that space. So I think there is some work there to make, to use your metaphor, to make those membranes permeable in other ways. So yeah, anyway, I think there'll be a lot more we can get into that. But Chris, I know you had a question or a comment.
Yeah, well, I like this model. And the only comment that I would make about what you've said so far is that there's two innovations here. One of them is moving away from the one teacher, one classroom, and one of them is moving away from teaching by telling and learning by listening to more active forms of student-centered learning. I don't think the first guarantees the second. The first can help with the second, but it doesn't guarantee the second. But my point is a little different. I first liked this model over half a century ago when I was a graduate student, and Dwight Allen, who was a dean of the school in which I was and who had recently been a professor at Stanford, was lauded for his idea of differentiated staffing, which in many ways had similarities to what we're describing here. And I have seen differentiated staffing, or what you're describing, emerge in many other professions, but not in education. And when I think about why it hasn't emerged, the real resistance has been from within the profession, not outside of the profession. It's been bitterly fought by many teachers who want to be able to close the door and not be accountable to much of anybody. It's been bitterly fought by unions who want the only criterion for teachers to be how long they've been in service. And it's been bitterly fought by many teacher educators and teacher education institutions and teacher education accreditation groups. So I don't know that it's an idea whose time has come unless we find a way to break down a lot of the resistance within the profession. And I'd like to know first whether you would agree with the way that I've characterized this, and then what strategies you see as necessary to get past the kind of early adopters and into the body of the profession.
So, Chris, I was thinking you might actually say something like that. And so I've done a bit of my homework, right? So team teaching in action. This is like circa I think it was 1964. Strategies and differentiated staffing. This is like 1972. There's actually a chapter in here called the MESA model, written by this guy, Jim Zaharis. who there's a school now named after this guy in Mesa Public Schools in Arizona, right? So I don't disagree with the word you said. I worry about this particular point probably more than anything else, which is, wait a second, like, haven't we seen this story before? And don't we know how it ends? So here are 3 reasons that I am cautiously optimistic. Reason number 1, I think we're on the cusp of, I think, a really big problem with respect to teacher shortage. We have 3.2 million teachers in the United States. That's a lot of people to find. We know that when you look at the distribution of vacancies, it is not random. That when we think about equity and we ask ourselves the questions, where are those vacancies? In Phoenix, as many as 25% of our Title I school classrooms are staffed by long-term subs. This is a crisis, right? This is a crisis, and so I think that we are, if we are thinking that we are going to fill 3.2 million boxes with 3.2 million widgets and do that successfully, to say nothing about the quality of education that people are getting, which is like the second point around deeper and personalized learning. Can we just talk about filling boxes for a second? I think we're not going to be successful. I think we're going to be totally looking left and right. And this is real now. And I predicted that it's going to be worse. I mean, education follows these economic trends. And, we see that teacher prep enrollment in teacher prep institutions across the country, on average, right, down about somewhere between 25 and 30% over the last decade and a bit, and that portends all sorts of problems, right? So that's one. Is I think that we actually are going to be in even more of a crisis, and if that's true, nothing spurs innovation, right? Like a crisis, or you shouldn't let a good crisis go to waste at the very least. And so I think that there's an opportunity there. 2, I think that technology is obviously very different than it was in 1964. I'm not sure that we're doing anything close to what is possible. So this is where I get really excited about many of you on this screen right now, because you're thinking about this, right? Are there ways that we could actually be leveraging technology, artificial intelligence, the beaming in of educators from all sorts of places? I grew up in rural northern Arizona. I was lucky to have a physics teacher. Most of my friends in other schools did not have one. But this is a very solvable problem at this point. Right. And the problem is we continue to look for people to put in those boxes and pray that they know something about physics. So technology and being able to use and leverage technology, I think, in new and creative ways is different. And then 3, if we get this right, starting with teacher preparation. And so the fact that we are sitting in a college of education who graduates more than 600, 700, 800 teachers a year in Arizona, who now are growing up not in the default 1 teacher, 1 classroom, or 1 mentor, 1 student teacher cloning experiment, but rather are actually coming into this profession as members of teams, multiple teacher candidates working together with multiple professional educators. You're already starting to see what it's like to not be a lone wolf teacher of record, swing the door on its hinges, and stay out of my way. And so, and this isn't just us. So we're partnered with AACTE and Lynn Gangone. This is the National Colleges of Teacher Education banded together. And we've got interest from places like Clemson and BU and Loyola Marymount. So, I mean, we're all over the country, and other colleges of ed are starting to say, wait a second, this is really interesting. And so somewhere between a crisis, technology, and teacher prep, I hope and pray that this is a little bit different this time around.
Thank you. I know, Kurt, you have a question. I just want to do a quick follow-up to this, Brent, particularly around the teacher prep piece. And maybe you can speak a little bit to sort of how MLFTC sort of put its sort of stake in the ground and, and leveraged its, the teacher shortage and the need, and sort of redesigning the teacher prep program. You can speak to that a little bit. And then Krista, if you could follow up with a little bit about, I know you have interns, you have, experienced teachers. What has changed in that dynamic with this model, which I think is like very interesting. And I think, Brent, you alluded to that thing, but Krista, maybe you can speak to, maybe to the broader community as well, get at that. So, but Brent, start with you around this piece of MLFTC and teacher prep. It is work in progress, but what is the vision there? And then move on to Krista.
So we could drop this into the notes as well, but our dean, Carol Basile, pinned a piece really early on. I've been at ASU for about 4 years now. She pinned the piece really early on. It was called, "What is a College of Education for?" And when I came in, about when that piece came out, ASU was partnered with, it's somewhere like about 40 different school districts where we were placing our teacher residents. Think of them as seniors in college that are spending an entire year in a student teaching experience. We were working with 40 plus districts, placing our students in 40 plus districts. This was like, they're all over the place. And so what the dean had the foresight to do is she said, what if we constricted that placement set? And instead of placing in 40 plus places, let's actually ask the question, who are the districts that are willing to think differently about their staffing models? And there are two things that are in wild shortage in Arizona. One of them is water. The second one is teachers. And so as a college of education with that many teacher candidates going out into schools, and we know from the data, right, that where you do your student teaching, there is a high likelihood that you will stay in that school or in that district, that community in your first year. And so when you've got a huge staffing crisis on your hands as a school or a district, getting teacher candidates, that's awesome. And so we have a little bit of leverage, actually, as a college of education. And again, this is not us saying, it has to be this way. I think that's really important. Instead, it's like, hey, if you want to think about placing teacher candidates, not in this one teacher, one mentor model, let's talk. And so what happened was we went from 40 some districts to 12, where we were placing teacher candidates. There are actually all sorts of really interesting economies of scale, and you lose way less energy at like actual physical and emotional and time, driving all over Phoenix when you're going to 12 places instead of 40. When you observe teacher candidates, you can actually spend more time in fewer schools. You get to know the culture of those schools better. So there's actually all these positive externalities that started to happen as well when we started to place our teachers differently. So that was the big connection to teacher prep. I'd love to hear Krista reflect on, what's it like? You've hosted a lot of teacher candidates that are now growing up in this new team-based model. What's the experience?
Yes, I've hosted them and I've hired them, and they've been phenomenal. So, Brent is right. There is a teacher shortage, and I am at a Title I school. And one of our biggest challenges is high turnover in staff and filling vacant positions. So when I said this started in January 2020, I wasn't really thinking about the teacher intern and teacher residency, because that did start the year before. And I brought on 9 student teachers from ASU really to help fill vacancy. The model was different. We weren't talking next education workforce, but it was an idea. It was a mini model where we had one lead teacher in charge of 2 classrooms of students, and they were given 3 paid student teachers. So it was a way to fill some vacancies. It was a way to start looking at teaming. The emphasis was not at that point on deeper personalized learning. It was just on teaming. And that was, I guess, my first experience. But through that, I learned the power of a team, the power of multiple adults in the same space talking about the same children. There was that feeling of isolation and being overwhelmed started to disappear. They were much more motivated and energetic. They became more creative. The student teachers are far more skilled in this model when they come out. I mean, they end up learning skills in more of a scaffolded way. And it turns out they all have their own expertise when they come into it as well. So it's not sit and watch the lead teacher, model a math lesson, and then you try to do the next math lesson like that. Or bring them along where the students need the support, but then the student teacher may have some expertise. So for example, our student teachers right now, we have 12 of them this year. Not all of them are paid. Some of them are in a paid and unpaid model, but some enter in by starting doing social emotional learning lessons, community building lessons. Some take over literature clubs some start with the student one-on-one conferring, and we move those student teachers as part of the team to help meet the needs of the students. But they grow the teachers grow far quicker and gain more expertise than any traditional teacher prep model I've ever seen.
Thank you. I know, Kurt, you had a question or a comment?
Yeah, both a question and a comment. First of all, for Chris, I know Dwight Allen. He's a great guy. And for any listeners or watchers of this episode or other episodes, do take a look at Dwight and his Wikipedia page and then his work. Phenomenal career, including creating micro teaching, which we utilized in Indiana. When I met him about 15 years ago, he was wrapping up his career at Old Dominion. I think one of his grad students ended up doing a postdoc with you, Chris. I'm not positive about that. He was doing Wikibooks. And I was doing Wikibooks. We were having international cross-cultural Wikibook projects. Well, what he was doing is he was having a class of 300 students, and he had a 100-chapter book he was designing, and he had 3 students each individually write a chapter of chapter 1, and 3 more write chapter 2, and 3 more write chapter, and they voted on the best one of the 3 for chapter 1, the best one of the 3 for chapter 2. And the top 100 chapters end up being the book that they used in the class. And they end up reading the book that they wrote. So that was just fascinating, and that was the last thing he did in his career was doing Wikibooks. And he's in his 70s, and give him credit. The guy was keeping up with the latest technologies and the latest innovations in participatory learning. And so, yeah, definitely. And I read your little memento, Chris. It's online. When you look up Dwight Allen, there's a little piece that Chris has written. So my question's for Krista. What prepared you for this particular role? And I ask that because people, again, will be watching this that aspire to be principals or school leaders. I know I just read some papers from my students, and a couple of them talked about wanting to be a principal of the school. And I'm having my students watch these, so I'm particularly thinking about my students, but really anyone. Not just what prepared you course-wise, prepared your mindset for. So I'm interested emotional preparedness as well as cognitive preparedness. I wonder if you could talk into that and what you still need, what you still see as important for you to tap into in the future to continue your professional development that will maybe move you to phase 2 down the road.
That's a really great question. I have to say that our district leaders, Dr. Forlis and Dr. Mallerwein, Dr. Forlis is our superintendent, Dr. Mallerwein, when I started, was my direct area superintendent. It began with them. They had a commitment. They're so inspiring and innovative, and they are trying to lead our district into making lasting impacts for students and educators. And so a lot of personal conversations with Dr. Mallerwein about what it would mean to be an innovative leader, what type of leadership works with people and schools. And so really he spent a lot of time talking to me about the importance of developing not only relationships, but psychological safety and trust, giving people the permission to be innovative and creative and how to support and remove barriers. So, I have to give him and Dr. Forles a lot of credit for helping develop me as a leader. The other thing I would say is just the networking. I think I have just an internal drive and passion to just not do mediocre work. And that's just not why I got into education. And then there's something about when you're the principal and your name is on that school, you really have a drive to just not, you're responsible for not only all the students, but the staff's well-being. And so, as I was seeking, I just started networking and how important that was. And Stevenson will never look exactly like all of the schools that I went to visit or the leaders that I meet with, but they truly helped me develop my identity as a leader, but our school's identity. And so that would be the biggest advice. It's just like we don't want our teachers working in isolation. As leaders, we cannot be working in isolation either.
Thanks.
So I have a question for both of you, actually. Punya, feel free to jump in. You're the associate dean. You must know something about what ISU is doing. But anyway.
No. I just associate with the deans, so.
Okay. So anyway.
They just let me know, yeah.
This approach, like Chris was talking about, it's been going on for a long time in other professions. If you go to a hospital, you got different kind of specialists doing all different kind of things. And we know, so Brent and Chris, that teachers have not traditionally been doing this. So what you're doing is not only personalization of learning, it's really personalization of teaching. You're really trying to drive the teacher's talent and the teacher's passion to do this, which is great. Now, historically, they have not been able to do this. So I was wondering, when they move to this model, do you have to do a lot of mentoring, or do you think teachers intuitively said, man, I know how to do this. I don't need anything. So what is the professional development process to make it happen? When I say that is that sometimes we overdo professional development. We over-control teachers. When they actually know how to naturally work on this, and like someone said, communities cannot be built, but they can be destroyed. So you can really build a community, but you can destroy communities. So I was just wondering, how do you help teachers go through the process to get better? And what are the plans? What's your thinking about, where to next? For example, when they become like this, what happens? Chris or Brent, both of you, you can say it. I have 2 years. I can hear both of you at the same time if you try.
This would be, we should try it in stereo, Krista. No, but you should start, and then I'll jump up again, sort of at what are we seeing across all 30 schools level. But I'd be very curious also to hear, is everyone on board?
Yeah. So here's what I would say the biggest thing for, administration and the leaders is, just like you want the teachers to differentiate and personalize learning for their students, you end up having to do that. So the idea of the professional development I would experience as a teacher would be the whole staff coming together, listening to something, talking about how they're going to implement it, and going back. That is not our professional learning here at Stevenson. It is very much job embedded. We talk about the kids need the lessons on the skills they need when they need it, well, that's what the teachers need. So there isn't a straight line. It happened, the professional development is happening in loops and, moves all around. It starts out by, I got them seeing the work of the third grade team, visiting the other schools, starting to network, bringing in experts. We started with a workshop model. So I needed coaches and, different classroom teachers in the workshop model, talking with my teachers, them trying things, being in the classroom together, giving them feedback. Then we have our 3rd through 6th grade math teachers. We meet with them and separately and talk about their needs and bring in experts for them. So it's not a one size fit all anymore. And it does make it, I think, much more challenging on administrators. But if you're going to move them forward, that's how you need to do it. And different teams are ready for different things at all the time. And so I am fortunate. I have a part-time dean. I have a Title I specialist who's been with me since the beginning of this work. And then I do have an instructional coach. And really together, we have to differentiate our supports to help our teachers, because they're willing and they're willing and they can completely learn. But I wouldn't say, like you were saying, they just know how to do it. They don't, and we need to support them.
Did anyone leave? Did teachers leave, Krista?
Oh, you mean once we decided to go school-wide model?
Yeah, this is not for me.
Yeah, I wondered if there was going to be more, but I have to say I was really surprised how even some of the most veteran staff were inspired and excited to do the work. So, I did have one after she was going to stick around, but after the ASU Summer Institute, she decided this wasn't for me, and it was fine. But other than that, pretty much it's been an exciting thing that everyone has stuck around for and is in. Now we're all in different, everyone's in a different place with their skills and abilities, but they're bought in.
So quickly, just to build on what Krista said, I'm glad you brought up the Summer Institute. One of the things we're trying to figure out how to do at ASU, because we broker, number one in innovation 7 years in a row. Like, we try to figure out how to do innovative things at wildly large scale. And so right now we're at 30 schools, 5 districts doing these models. I mean, if we have our druthers, right, it'll be like 1,000 schools in multiple states, like really thinking about this. And so what are the scalable ways that we might be able to help to bring some professional learning to educators? And so we do 3 or 4 things that are aligned to this professional learning about the actual, like, what is the team-based next educated work with? What does this actually look like? So one, we're starting to offer kind of quick 60-minute info sessions. Come and get the nuts and bolts of like what this is. You're a superintendent, you're a building level principal, like find out about it. And then if you're still interested, we've got basically a 3-session sequence, as slow as you, as fast as you can, as slow as you must, to essentially figure out who, this is primarily for principals, figure out where would I start in this work? Who are the stakeholders I need to invest? Borrowing from Krista's example in learning, like I'm going to start with a single team. I'm not going to try to flip my school overnight. Like, that's bananas. So like, you're going to start with like a single team. And then what does that look like? Maybe it's 2 teams. And then if you're still interested after a 3-session sequence, you figured out where you're going to pilot or start this work, then there's a Summer Institute. It's virtual. You come in, it's like 4 days, and it's you and your team. And some of it is like what we're doing right now. And some of it is like, turn the cameras off. You're with your team at your school, with your coaches, with everyone that Krista just said, and you're working. And then we host something called network cohorts. Think of 2 vectors. One vector is like kind of age of the kids, roughly, with whom you're lucky enough to work, elementary students, secondary students, and then where you're at in the implementation of these models. Are you just starting out, or have you been doing it for a few years? And so you can imagine elementary groups that are just starting out, or high school groups that have been at it for a while. And you start to bring collections of educators together in these virtual spaces to learn with and from one another. It's less of us being like, here's like the answer, and more like, all right, what are your questions? And you all now, we're a convener, and the power of the educators doing this work and bringing solutions to the table is it's awesome. Last thing to say is around specializations and about colleges of education, and how can we not blockbuster video ourselves in a world that is moving totally in the direction of on-demand professional learning that doesn't necessarily look like, master's degrees and like 3 credit hour courses. So we are playing with this notion of building specializations. And the specializations are things that Krista would look at and say, it'd be great if like I could have someone on my team go deep on this. And this thing, right? Andrew Carnegie would be proud of us. It's like 9 credit hours. But what if those 9 credit hours were actually offered as single 1 credit hour units? And what if those 1 credit hour units could actually be further decomposed into some micro or nano courses that actually logically stack and build? If we're talking about equity, right? It's like people with time and money do things like get master's degrees or doctorates for the most part, right? It's like, how can we make and liberate the greatness of what is in our colleges of education, and make it more readily accessible without like blowing up the entire, system at the same time. So it's possible that Krista's teachers may want to do a specialization in, I'm going to pick something, team leads, right? Like the set of knowledge, skill, and dispositions that someone leading one of these teams, it's totally not natural, would need to have. And then how could the district recognize and value that as, not only incremental base pay increase, but also when they start looking for principals of another school, Krista's built some bench depth of leadership in her educator workforce. And you could imagine that there are lots and lots of those different specializations. And you could imagine that you could get in the door by going to your summer institute, finding a couple of micro courses, and then you're sort of foot in the door. And we got to think about what the pricing model is and how that all works. Punya will figure all that out for us. Thank you, Punya. But we're really excited to start to think differently about how we liberate our curriculum and all that we've got locked up in a college of education and make it wildly more accessible for professional educators, for community educators. I hope we're onto something.
So, Chris, I know you have a question. I just want to add one thing. So one of the things that ASU has done in the recent past is break itself up into 3 different, what we're calling enterprises. And I think this feeds into the point that Brent is making. So we have the traditional academic enterprise, which is the degree courses and so on. We have the knowledge enterprise, which is the research and the knowledge development, intellectual property, all of that good stuff. But the third enterprise, which is just starting up, is this idea of what is the learning enterprise. And that is particularly targeted to people who do not necessarily want a degree, but want to be upskilled, who want, and some of the work that Brent is talking about fits very neatly within that learning enterprise model. Again, a lot still to be worked out, but that's sort of a move that ASU, like President Crow, has sort of solidly put himself behind, that these are the 3 pillars which sort of hold our ASU today. So Chris, I know you had a question and I had one to follow up. So we are 8 minutes away, so go for it.
So one of the things I learned early in my career is that students paid much more attention to what I did than to what I said. So for example, giving a lecture on the importance of learning by doing, not a good plan. And I'm thinking about people from other schools of education who might be watching this program and maybe getting excited about the next generation workforce idea. But the fact of the matter is the faculty have to model what they're preaching. And as you know, there's many things within the university that are going to fight like hell with faculty who want to do this, the tenure system being one of them. So I'm curious as to what advice you would give another school of education who might want to get their foot in the water with this model that you're developing?
So, Chris, first I'd say we've got, if we pick up the mirror instead of the magnifying glass, we've got a little work to do within our own College of Education, right, around how we're bringing teams of teacher educators around our students. And this is happening in some small-ish ways, and there's some pilots and some experiments. But you're right, like the default normative structures, things like literally the scheduling system at the university around which people are in which rooms at which times causes like most people's heads to explode and therefore run screaming from this work. Right. So we've got work to do on this point to model it out. We do have some interesting structures because we're talking about teachers. We're talking about in-service teachers. You can think about a team of, so you have the people teaching the coursework back at the university, and you've got what we call site leads that are out supporting teachers in the field. And like a lot of time, those people don't talk to each other. So even like those moves, how can we start to bring people together? What I would say is that, if anyone was at a College of Education thinking about this work, not only just the transformative nature of their own work, but how they could start thinking differently about the placement of their teachers, we're happy to have those conversations. And as I mentioned before, I think that there is some momentum building within AACTE and some of the associated member institutions to start to do some of this work. And quite frankly, if we figure it out together, that's going to allow us to have a little bit of leverage also on people that do things like make the default scheduling systems at the universities. And I think that the same would be true for Krista, I'm guessing, right? Like things like taking attendance when all of a sudden, like you don't have a bunch of people that are associated with a box and one person.
I'm going to ask this quick question, but here's what distracted me for a second. My dog was acting funny. So this is what you get for living in Arizona. He was trying to eat a scorpion. That's a scorpion right there. Anyway, so Krista, this one's for you. I know Brent can speak to this as well, but it's not just that you're changing teams. You are also, it's changing space, it's changing curriculum, the communication, the connections with the community. Can you speak briefly to that before we pass it on to Chris to introduce the next episode? So you have a couple of minutes, I think.
Your question is how it's impacted the community, like the parents. Is that what you're speaking to?
No, I'm also speaking to the other sort of concomitant changes that come once you do this team-based model. You had mentioned that you have to knock down some walls, curriculum, and so it's like you change one knob in an ecology, in an ecosystem. There are these ripple effects, and I just wanted to speak to some of those.
You're right. I mean, right last week we were my Title I and I were laughing. We're like, why do we have to do all of this stuff? It's a ripple effect and it's constantly changing and it is a lot of work. No, here's what I would say. The bottom line is people are open to change when it works. And if you go into our classrooms and you see the change in our students, if you see the change in our teachers and how they feel, it works. And all that other stuff that is really challenging and takes a lot of details and work and communication is just doesn't seem as much as a headache. And so I just would note that. And that's why the change in some ways has happened so naturally and easily. And people are buying in. The parents and community, once, we had so many COVID restrictions in the beginning, they couldn't come on campus, right? But fortunately that led up towards in spring and the summer, and parents coming in and seeing the classrooms and getting to see what their students are experiencing. I mean, I haven't gotten any negative feedback. Everyone is excited. Yeah, we might pose some challenges for the people who oversee our attendance and, scheduling and give them a little bit of a headache. But other than that, most people are on board and excited because they're seeing that it works. And educators will work hard, especially hard, if they see how successful it is. So I think that's what I'm just most excited about. I walk through my classrooms and I get goosebumps every day.
Thank you, Krista. And just looking at the time, I want to thank both of you, Brent and Krista, for joining us today. We could go on and on. There are lots of, I think we barely scratched even the list of questions that I had shared with you. But I know that we did cover a lot of ground. So really appreciate your taking time to join us. And Chris, I think you're going to introduce our next episode.
Yes, but I also want to thank you for coming today. Regardless of what happens in all the other episodes with different themes, if we don't have strong educators at the heart of any of these models, none of them are going to work. So we have to figure this one out. It's fundamental to everything else. So I'm excited about next week because we're going to have 3 guests, 2 from the WEND Collective and 1 from Grantmakers for Education, who are going to talk about human-centered approaches to education, philanthropy, and systems change. Now, we haven't had episodes that really centered on philanthropy, and perhaps that's because traditional models of philanthropy have not been very effective, frankly, in driving educational change. And so I'm excited about our guests because they're going to talk about emergent theories of change and community-based partnerships that really look at bottom-up, middle-out philanthropy that's empowered by top-down, as opposed to top-down philanthropy that dictates what the model of change is. So I hope you'll come and join us next week,